Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel T-Spot. In this video, 1923 is the second Yellowstone origin story after 1883, which showed the first on-screen generation of Duttons making their way to Montana to establish the Yellowstone Dunn Ranch. The patriarch of that family, James, died in 1893 after being shot by a horse thief. This was shown to us in a flashback in the 4th season of Yellowstone. His wife, Margaret, apparently died a year later, but not before she wrote a letter to James' brother, Jacob, asking him to move to Montana to save her family. Jacob obliged, but he was too late to save Margaret. He found her frozen in a snowdrift, and her 2 sons barely made it out alive. Jacob and his wife, Kara, raised these 2 children as their own. All of this information is revealed to us by James and Margaret's firstborn, Elsa, who died all the way back in 1883 toward the end of the family's journey to Montana. In her voiceover, Elsa talks about how violence is always haunted the Duttons from the Scottish Highlands to all the way out here to Montana. And this point is made right after we watch Kara kill an injured man who was about to kill her. We lack context for this sequence because it is an event from a future episode. And even when violence doesn't haunt Elsa's family, they seek it. That is the case for her younger brother, Spencer, who she never met because he was born after the journey to Montana. We met Spencer in a Yellowstone flashback taking place in 1893. This was Spencer then, and this is him now. He's a hunter whose apathy is rooted in his scaring experience during World War I. Spencer is similar to his father, rather James in that regard, because James was a Civil War veteran who also had bad memories of warfare. He never talked about it. Elsa goes on to mention that only one of James' children lived to see their own children grow up. And that lucky fellow is John. This was him in 1883, skipped 10 years, and he's all grown up. In 1923, he's running the ranch with his uncle Jacob. John is married to Emma, and they have a son named Jack, who's also involved in the family business. Elsa concludes her introduction by saying that Jacob made the ranch into an empire, and then the empire crumbled. That is when 1923 kicks off. Jacob is in Bozeman to attend a town hall meeting with John and Sheriff William McDowell. We soon learn that a cattle rancher has killed some sheep grazing on land that was leased to him, and so the leader of the sheep herders doesn't want this to go unanswered. But why is Jacob conducting this meeting? Well, he's the head of the Montana Livestock Association, whose purview is obviously livestock. Coming back to Banner, he is Scottish, and he uses an Irish slur to insult the cattle rancher that gets shot the sheep. Banner thinks there should be consequences. But Jacob is largely indifferent because he points out the fact that the sheep have ruined the grass, and so the cattle rancher's animals will die too. It's not going to be from a bullet, but from starvation because there's no grass anymore. Jacob decides there won't be any more grazing on the valley until it rains. So far, it's been a dry summer. He tells Banner he should have leased more land for grazing. When Banner points out that Jacob has a whole mountain range to himself while everyone else fights for every blade of grass down here, Jacob responds by saying, "I have what my family fought for." You want to fight me for it too? I didn't think so. Banner wants to continue this heated discussion outside because going out the mountains isn't a realistic solution for him. Bears would just eat his animals. He makes a big mistake by grabbing Jacob. John holds Banner and Jacob holds a gun to Banner's throat. The sheriff gets there just in time and warns Banner that Jacob is an agent of the state. Banner should be careful going forward if he doesn't want to spend a month in jail. Jacob leaves after saying that stealing a man's grass is like stealing his steers. He warns Banner that if he graces another man's lease again, he will have Banner's whole flock. Banner makes fun of the term stealing grass. He is in disbelief. He says man doesn't own the grass. The mountains do, and God does. And you're no God, Jacob Dotton. You're no God. Jacob then attends the Livestock Association meeting where we learn about all of the challenges they're facing. Firstly, there's drought, and that problem is made worse by locusts. They destroy the grass and livestock cannot get fed. Secondly, prices are going down because men have returned from the war and their families are now mostly eating their own beef. They don't need to buy it. Jacob's plan is to push all the herds together. Take them up the mountains and protect them from wolves and bears until the fall. That will require the help of a lot of cowboys, but the alternative is worse. There's no grass down here, and the livestock would just die of starvation. so the Dutton land up in the mountains will be able to feed the herd. There is one problem with that. Before the Duttons and other ranchers embark on this 2-week-long journey, Banner and his fellow sheep herders cross into the Dutton land by cutting the fence wires. The Duttons and all the other ranchers start to drive, and Jack discovers the sheep. So a herder takes aim and shoots at him. That is the main plot line of the premiere. And it was able to pique my interest because not only are the Duttons fighting rough natural conditions, but they're also up against desperate people who think that these conditions permit them to circumvent rules that are there for a reason. You can certainly sympathize with the plight of Banner and herders like him, but that doesn't give him the right to prioritize his own livestock over others who've actually paid money to lease land. Those rules are there for a reason, and because Banner broke them, a range war is about to kick off. His shenanigans will not end well for him because he's playing games with other people's livelihoods. Time to rewind a little bit and talk about Jack's personal life. He is supposed to get married in less than a week, but the ride up the mountain means he won't be back in time. When his fiancée, Elizabeth, finds out that the wedding is getting delayed because the cattle drive cannot wait, she tells him to go and do the deal with a cow up in the mountains. Karen knew that Jack wouldn't be able to handle this situation, so she arrived soon afterward to patch things up, and she explains to Elizabeth how things work around here. Elizabeth's father, Bob, owns the neighboring Stratford Ranch, but she's been away from home for a while to study. Karen says that if Elizabeth truly wants to spend her life with Jack, she's going to have to get used to stuff like this because it's just the beginning. The herd always comes first. This way of life isn't easy, but the plus side is the freedom it brings, the kind that most people don't even know about. Elizabeth says that Jack makes her dizzy when she's with him and she can't breathe without him. So she will learn this life and embrace it to be with him. Kara brings Elizabeth back to Jack, and as they kiss, Bob watches from afar with Jacob. In the meantime, Jack's uncle, Spencer, is busy in Africa. He starts off by tracking down and killing a specific lion. He then travels by train to Nairobi, Kenya, to kill a leopard that is causing some trouble at a campsite. There's a flashback in here showing Spencer during the Great War. His leg is broken and he can't retreat with his fellow soldiers. We see him kill a whole lot of enemies. He eventually wakes up on the train and pulls a gun on a potter, which is a reaction caused by his nightmare. Spencer and his 2 fellow hunters arrive at the camp. These 2 serve as bait while Spencer waits outside the tent with his rifle. However, we soon find out that there are actually 2 leopards, and one of them is a British woman Spencer met earlier in the day. Spencer shoots the leopard, but he's not able to save her. He relaxes for a second thinking that the job is done. But now his friends shout that there's a second one and that one jumps at Spencer. We don't see what happens to him, but I'm guessing he survives. For me, this was the most enjoyable part of the premiere. Spencer's PTSD has made him so obviously disillusioned that he can't go back home. He probably drowns out his war memories by hunting animals in Africa. He constantly puts himself in the middle of wildly dangerous situations because what else is there to do after tasting the feeling of avoiding death and surviving? And his mind cannot fathom living a normal life back in Montana. Karen keeps writing letters to him from time to time, wondering why he's not coming back, and she assumes that it's because Spencer is seeking the part of himself that he lost during the war. We also pay a visit to a government sporting school for Indians. Missionaries were sent to reservations to set up these sorts of schools to assimilate Native Americans into society. And you know how these things go: abuse, violence, the whole shebang. It's horrible. And we watch this through Tiana Rainwater's perspective. She is presumably an ancestor of Thomas from Yellowstone. Sister Mary keeps hitting Tiana's hands until she has enough and strikes back. She beats the living crap out of Sister Mary, and they're both taken to the headmaster's room. Father Renal lashes out and punishes Sister Mary for her lack of compassion. He then turns his attention to Tiana and starts whipping her. He says he has compassion but no mercy. We see the damage when the students take a bath. Tiana is badly injured. Tiana and Sister Mary agree that they should try to avoid going to Father Renal's room from now on. And as Tiana speaks to her friend that night, she figures that all of their friends and family that have left this school must not have survived because they didn't write letters to Tiana, even though they promised to. She doesn't think they made it out, and she's not sure she will be able to. Let's begin our episode 2 discussion in Africa, where Spencer tries to fend off a leopard attack, which came as a surprise for him because he had already killed the only one he thought was present at the camp. So he stabs the second leopard after it jumps at him. He then tries to shoot it, but it is gone. It's not gone too far away, though, because it latches on to one of Spencer's guides. The other guide and Spencer eventually kill the leopard, but the guide that got attacked suffers deadly injuries. Afterwards, Spencer finds a doctor to take care of his wounds as he doesn't want to deal with gangrene. He's angry at the camp's leader, Richard Holland, for not informing him about the existence of another leopard, and he notes that Holland did not say he was sorry. Spencer fires off a bullet close to Holland's head and he forces him to apologize at gunpoint. Spencer goes back to Narrabee in the morning. In fact, that's why he doesn't do anything to Holland. He needs a ride. And at a hotel bar in Narrabee, a British lady by the name of Alexandra flirts with Spencer. Apparently, she and her friends wondered if Spencer was in fact the famous hunter they all heard about, and she was the only one bold enough to approach him. She talks about all of Spencer's famous kills, some of which are made up, and she mentions the one he killed with his bare hands. He wants to know if she believes everything she hears, and she says only when she wants it to be true. Spencer is confused as to why she would want that to be true, and she says, for the romance of it. When he argues that there is no romance in it, Alexandra wonders why he would do it then, and Spencer goes, because dying is the most alive you'll ever feel. Alexandra asks him if he doesn't see the romance in that, and the voice inside Spencer's head is like, she's got a point. Alexandra's friends take her away because guess what? She is engaged. This conversation further solidifies a point I made in my episode 1 breakdown about how Spencer constantly puts himself in the middle of wildly dangerous situations because there isn't anything else to do for him after tasting the sweet feeling of avoiding death and surviving during the Great War. He continues to chase that high. We later learn that Spencer works for the Protectorate of Kenya, and his next assignment is to hunt down a spotted hyena in Tanganyika because that animal is causing trouble for railroad workers. Spencer is going to head out in the morning, and he mentions this to Alexandra later that night when she takes a breather from her engagement party and comes across Spencer at the bar. She has an adventurous soul, just like Spencer, and she regards her upcoming marriage as nothing more than a real estate arrangement. Their conversation is interrupted by Alex's fiance. He cannot, however, prevent Alexandra from running away with Spencer the next morning. Spencer tries to warn her that where he is going is dangerous, and she goes, "Let's look death in the eye then, shall we?" End quote. This was an entertaining sequence, and what made it fun was the contrast between Spencer and Alexandra's levels of enthusiasm. Spencer has seen some things, which is why he looks indifferent, cold, stoic, while Alexandra hasn't been able to live the way she wants to, chasing adventures and putting herself in danger. So she comes across as impassioned, the opposite of Spencer. Meanwhile, in Montana, Spencer's nephew, Jack, is fine after a bunch of sheep herders shot at him at the end of episode 1. Jacob and company come to his rescue. They kill some of the herders, and after the herders yield, Jacob teaches Banner and his fellow herders a lesson by hanging them from a tree on horseback while their hands are tied right behind their backs. Jacob talks about why he did this later on, saying that if you give a man enough time, he'll figure out his way out of anything. So he thinks some of them will make it. In fact, he hopes they do. Jack wants to know why. And Jacob explains, this ranch's greatest enemy is not wolves or drought or blizzards or Texas fever. It is other men. Because man will choose to take what you've built rather than try and build it for himself. That's why your enemy's fear of you has to be greater than their greed. I gave those men a chance because I wanted them to tell the world what happened when they crossed me. So do any of them make it out alive? Well, it won't surprise you to hear that Banner does. He gets a knife from another horse's saddlebag and cuts himself loose at night. But something tells me Banner has not learned his lesson, and he's going to double down and seek revenge on the Duttons. Jacob and all the other ranchers move the herd further south, close to the park, where there's a suitable location with a spring feeding into a lake. So that's where the herd will stay. 3 cowboys will stay with them for now, while everyone else goes back home. In the meantime, the foreman of the ranch, Zane, carries out a task given to him by Jacob. Jacob Zane delivers all the sheep they got from the herders to the nearby Indian reservation. And they give Zane a gift for Jacob and tell Zane to thank Jacob because they needed this. Jacob kills 2 birds with 1 stone here. He helps the people at the rest by giving them food and clothing material, while at the same time punishing the trespassing herders by taking their sheep to a place from where they can't be recovered. There's also a funny scene back at the ranch with Emma and Kara. Emma had always hoped that her son, Jack's recklessness, would be suppressed by his wife. I was hoping his wife would take some more to fire out of the next generation. But after spending a few days with Elizabeth, Emma realizes that Elizabeth is going to have the opposite effect. And Kara goes, "It seems your son is marrying gasoline, my dear, and the fire will only get bigger." At the boarding school in North Dakota, Tiana is punished by Sister Mary for speaking her native language. The tension builds up throughout the day, and they fight yet again. And as punishment, Tiana is thrown into a solitary confinement box outside the school as Father Reynal cautions her not to use that language anymore. It goes from bad to worse for Tiana when she eventually gets out of the box. At first, it looks like Sister Alice wants to help Tiana bathe. But it turns out she's got an ulterior motive. She enjoys doing it, if you know what I mean. And, as if that wasn't enough, Sister Mary shows up and beats Tiana again, promising to kill whatever is left of her original identity if she ever attacks her again. We find out that Tiana is originally from Montana, where her grandmother, Isaac, is trying to get her back home, which is a complicated task because she has to adopt Tiana to accomplish her goal. Tiana's mother has passed away, and her father works the reservation hers, so he's away from home, which is why the government was able to take Tiana away. If Isaac adopts Tiana, she'll be able to come back home because there's a Baptist day school only a quarter-mile from Isaiah's house. But first, Isaiah has to go in front of a judge in Crow Agency, which is the governmental headquarters of the Crow. It's one of those census-designated places. To kick off the third episode, the Dutton man raced back to the ranch to their families, and Kara is relieved to see Jacob because she had a bad feeling about this trip. Jacob confirms that something has indeed went down. In fact, they'll have to head into town the next day to inform the sheriff about it. The Dunns and their cowboys do that. They go to Bozeman, and Sheriff McDowell tells Jacob that he can't be hanging people out in the woods anymore. Jacob argues that bringing them here wouldn't have made a difference because a mob would have lynched and hanged them anyway. McDowell doesn't want a range war between cattle ranchers and sheep herders. He's busy enough dealing with cattle thieves out of Wyoming. But Jacob insists that the range war has already begun. Banner and his men ran their sheep on his ground and attacked them first. So he urges McDowell to get some deputies up to the mountains and keep the herders on their own land, quote, "or I'll do it and you seeing how I do it," end quote. Jacob gets back to his family after chatting with a fellow rancher he hasn't seen in a while. And it's too late to travel back to the ranch now. So Jacob has already booked rooms at Hotel Bozeman to spend the night in town. Earlier in the day, we saw Kara and all the other guns going around in town. They talked to a salesman about new appliances like the washing machine and the refrigerator. And if they wanted, they could get electricity to the ranch, but they would have to rent these appliances. So for now, it is a pass. At night, Jack and Elizabeth find a speakeasy and have some fun before going back to the hotel, where Elizabeth tells Jack she's worth the wait. But then she changes her mind and they do the deed. In the morning, as Jacob shaves, Kara goes on a rant about how razor companies are the representation strong with the humankind. Their greed has led them to come up with products for a woman. So now they shave their legs and under their arms, all of which she finds unnecessary. Jacob says it is a joy to listen to her babble-on about utter nonsense. And before they head out, Kara catches Jacob looking himself in the mirror, and he wonders just when he's gotten this old. He has been so busy living his difficult life and surviving that he hasn't taken a moment to stop and think about that. Jacob tells all the cowboys to ride in front, and the Dutton men will stay with the wagon. We know there's trouble coming at this point because a stranger spotted the Duttons in town on their first day, and he got on his horse to inform Banner, who by this point had found his way home after cutting the noose. In episode 2, unsurprisingly, the Duttons are ambushed. Gunfire starts coming in from the tree line. Elizabeth is shot in the lower chest area, and Jack gets it close to his shoulder, while Bob, Elizabeth's father, seems to be the first casualty. Everyone is able to get out of the wagon and take cover behind the trunk of a fallen tree. But Elizabeth is still on the wagon, and it's on the move because the horses are spooked. But Jack goes after her and gets her, and they hide behind this big rock. Banner's men eventually come out and try to hunt them down, but the guns hold their own. That is, until Banner flanks them from behind with what looks like a Tommy gun. Jacob tells Kara and Emma to run, and they do, towards Jack and Elizabeth. Banner says he's a man of his word and starts spraying, managing to land quite a few bullets on Jacob and John. The Yellowstone cowboys make their way back to the wagon after hearing the gunshots, but they arrive just as Banner starts shooting and Kara and Emma are running toward the rock. So everyone except Bob, John, and Jacob are saved by the cowboys. Some sheep herders are killed and others run away, including Banner. Kara goes back to the fallen tree to find John dead and Jacob badly injured. She then sees one of Banner's men. He is injured and she goes after him. They both have to reload and Kara is quicker, so she kills him. And this was the opening scene of the premiere. During that opening, Elsa's voiceover said that violence has always followed this family. And this was yet another example. The Duttons arrived back at the ranch with John and Bob dead, Jacob badly injured, Elizabeth needing urgent medical attention, and Jack with a relatively mild wound. Jacob knows that there's no coming back from this for him, so his sole focus is on keeping his family and this ranch safe, or as safe as possible. He orders Zane not to contact the sheriff because that would announce Jacob's death to the world. And in turn, everyone would come after the ranch, including banks, miners, and thieves. Because of his situation and because John is dead, Jacob tells Kara that it's time for Spencer to come home now. And as a doctor and nurses rush into the house, Kara steps out and writes another letter to Spencer. Quote, Spencer, your brother has been killed. By the time you receive this letter, I suppose your uncle has been killed as well. Your nephew has been wounded. This ranch and your legacy are in peril. War has descended upon this place and your family. Whatever war you fight within yourself must wait. You must come home and fight this one. End quote. Let's turn our attention to Spencer now. He is hunting a spotted hyena in Tanganyika, and he goes on an adventure with Alexandra to show her the footprints of a child based into a lava rock. He mentions this spot after Alexandra brings up Darwin's theory of evolution. And Spencer doesn't have an opinion on where humans come from, but he knows that they've been around these parts in Africa for a very long time. And because of that, they visit the footprint spot. Spencer hesitantly asks Alexandra if he can call her Alex, and she is fine with that. But she points out how difficult it would be for him to propose to her if it was this hard to ask about a nickname. Spencer is like, let's do it right now. And it takes a while for Alex to realize he is serious. Spencer doesn't get why they need to wait. He promises her that there are things about him that she won't like, so she doesn't need to wait around to realize that. And in the end, it's settled. They're getting married. As they make their way back to the camp and have to stop because of elephants, Spencer talks about how they don't look real. And the way he describes them makes Alex realize that he's not just this hardened man. She sees the boy in him now. She sees what their boy would be like in him. And Spencer feels the same way he sees their child in her. But this moment their sharing is interrupted by an elephant that attacks and flips their car. He eventually has to shoot it, and they don't have enough time to hike back to the camp. So they climb up a tree which isn't high enough. So as lions and hyenas surround a dead elephant at night, Spencer and Alex are eventually noticed. And as they get attacked, Spencer has to shoot some of them as Alex freaks out. Even though Spencer is good, this is a numbers game and they're eventually going to get eaten. Which is why they're happy to see some cars from the camp riding toward them and rescuing them on the way back. Alex admits that she didn't feel alive when she looked to death in the eye, which was her goal. That was the point of this adventure, but all she felt was horror, and she never wants to feel that way again. For a long time, that was the only way Spencer could feel. That's how much the war scared him. But that changed after he met Alex. He doesn't need to put himself in these dangerous situations anymore just to feel something. He feels love whenever he looks at Alex. So they agree that Spencer should put this life behind him now, which is definitely convenient and will allow him to travel back to Montana. But he's not going back to a calm and peaceful land that will give him and Alex a safe spot in this world. No, he's going back to war, and he's going to war with men, which is different from hunting down these dangerous animals. For the most part, he has a playbook in Africa. He can follow that, and his abilities bring him success. He understands how different animals live and hunt and stalk and prey in ambush. But with men, it's different, more unpredictable. and the horror he and Alex feel could be a lot more intense back in Montana. As Elsa says, violence follows the Duttons wherever they go, and Alex will come to understand that sooner rather than later. We begin this one in the aftermath of Banner's attack and find out that Jacob has survived the assassination attempt. Thanks to Dr. Miller's timely arrival at the ranch, Jacob is not completely out of the woods yet, but there's hope for him. Jack and Elizabeth are fine too. In fact, Elizabeth's mother, Beverly, tries to get her daughter to leave Montana and go back east to a hospital. But Elizabeth doesn't like that idea because she is still thinking about her wedding. Beverly says that the wedding is no more and that it got killed the moment Elizabeth's father, Bob, got killed. Beverly then turns to Jack and says, quote, "If you still wish to have her hand, I suggest you pack your things. Any reason I had for living in this godless place is dead," end quote. Jack responds in a hilarious fashion, quote, "No disrespect, Mrs. Stratford, but I ain't marrying you," end quote. And here, Beverly slaps him for his poor manners. Kara, in turn, slaps Beverly, telling her that she'll be the one disciplining her nephew. And Beverly is shown the door. Kara allows Elizabeth to make her own choice as she does not hesitate for a single second. She wants to stay here and be with Jack. Meanwhile, Zane is going to the post office to send Kara's letter to Spencer. And Zane himself would have preferred the wire because this letter won't reach Spencer for months. But this is what Jacob wanted. He didn't want the world to know that they were weak, because then everybody would come after them. That is why they're trying to keep this under wraps, and they're using the much slower method of sending a letter. But here is the twist. The letter reaches Spencer by the end of this episode because we learned that his storyline is approximately 3 months in the future compared to the ongoings in Montana. Alex and Spencer are at an isolated beach when Alex finds Spencer's letters, and apparently he hasn't read any of them. That's because missing home and dreaming has killed a lot of soldiers. If you want to eat a bullet in the battle, you start wishing for a letter. So he never read any of Kara's letters during the war, and afterward he felt guilty for not doing so, which is why he's been ignoring the letters in his family. Alex says she's a very jealous lover and she won't share Spencer with his demons. So they face them and chase them away together. By reading every single letter, Alex gets to know Spencer's family and Spencer catches up with what his family has been up to. Alex continues to read the letters as Spencer falls asleep, but she wakes him up after she reads the last one, the one we saw Kara writing. At the end of episode 3, the letter calls for Spencer to come back home because his brother John is dead and his uncle Jacob might be too. Spencer is distraught and wants to know when the letter was written. And as we've already established, it was 3 months ago. Back in Montana, Emma starts digging her husband's grave, and some cowboys help her out while Banner finds out that only 2 of his fellow sheepherders have made it out alive, though he's going to need to find some manpower. Which takes him to the mansion of Donald Whitfield. Banner says that Jacob and John are dead, and soon he'll be able to take over the ranch. When he does, he will lease Donald the mineral rights. But Banner will have a massive area for his sheep, while Donald has the mountains for himself. He's going to make a fortune from gold, silver, and coal mining. It's a win-win situation. However, Donald is a savvy man, and he knows he's got the upper hand in this negotiation. Banner doesn't have the means to conquer the ranch without Donald's help, but Donald will provide the means, and in exchange, the lease for the mineral rights will be considered already paid. And not only is Donald shrewd, but he's also mightily nasty. He warns Banner not to go back on his word, and if he does, Donald will do unspeakable things to Banner's wife and kids. It's a rather graphic description, which gives you the sense that Donald might have done this before. They shake on it, and Donald starts funding Banner. Banner quickly puts his new funds to good use by hiring some men, and they go after the Duttons and other families cavil up in the mountains. They kill the cowboys protecting them, and they start riding toward Wyoming. They'll put them on a train and sell them at their destination far away from Montana. Zane delivers this news to Kara, and he wants to go after the thieves before they get to the train. Jack likes that idea and says either we take this fight to them, or the fight is coming to us. Kara, in the meantime, regards this plan as rash, and she needs a moment to think. She goes inside and starts praying next to Jacob. She asks for direction, which is when Jacob wakes up and tells her, "You be the leader." Jacob is in agreement with his wife. He doesn't think they can afford to fight until Spencer arrives. So Jacob wants to let the stolen cattle go. But the good news is only half of the Dutton herd was at that location, which means they still got the other half. Jacob tells Zane what to do with those. The cows will be weaned from their mamas, though they'll be separated, and the mothers will be sold to raise funds. Also, they'll let bulls breed with the heifers once they weigh 700 pounds. And a heifer is basically a cow that has not borne a calf yet or has borne only one calf. That is their business plan to keep the banks away. But they also need a PR plan because there's going to be a livestock association meeting very soon, and people are going to start getting suspicious when Jacob doesn't show up. He tells Kara to go to the meeting in his stead and tell them that he is in Wyoming chasing the cattle thieves. And Kara does show up to the meeting in Bozeman, but she improvises a little bit. She says that the thieves killed Bob Stratford, and she doesn't talk about what happened to John or Jacob. But mentioning Bob's passing is enough to get people to pay attention. She argues that their response must be forceful but also lawful because one mob begets another. And this is where the improvisation part comes into play. She says it's high time that this association had the authority to make arrests and have jurisdiction over the entire state, the power to issue warrants and to prosecute offenders of lease violations. The governor has apparently been made aware of this request, and now Kara asks the association for a vote in favor of the creation of the police force. Nobody bites at first because Kara can't call a vote. The U.S. next, but the closest voyage is 3 weeks away, so Spencer is going to have to find another way. Oh, and all of this happens after an ominous voiceover monologue by Spencer's late sister, Elsa, who says that this journey to the U.S. will be Spencer's last. We'll get back to this in a little bit. As Spencer looks for a ship, a man points him to Luca, who is taking a tugboat to the Suez Canal, where Spencer can book a ship to anywhere. It's a massive hub. He's not able to go on a bigger ship, a trawler for example, because that would be too dangerous for Alex. She would be the only woman on board, and the deck hands would have their way with her. Even though Spencer agrees to go with Luca on the tugboat, he still tries to leave Alex behind for now, and send for her later because he's worried that this voyage is too dangerous for her. Alex, in turn, gives him an ultimatum similar to what happens between Elizabeth and Jack, saying, "We have a life together," or "We live our lives apart. You only get to choose me once," end quote. And Spencer tells her to get her things. That is a good decision because Alex knows how Spencer can send his wire to Montana. He can't do it directly, but the message can be transferred from ship to ship until it gets to London, and there they can wire anywhere in the States. That is how his message reaches Kara. All is looking good, and they board the tugboat. But something smells fish, and I'm not talking about the literal fish. No, Luca keeps spitting blood. And we learned that his ocean liner, his big passenger ship, was made into a hospital during the war. And some of the patients there were affected by mustard gas and who knows what else. That is probably why his body is giving up on him. Luca teaches them the basics before going to sleep, and he takes over after 6 hours. So Spencer and Alex get to sleep for a little bit. And Spencer wakes up and realizes that the engines aren't running. So he checks up on Luca and realizes that he's dead. And that's not all. The ghost ship they had an encounter with earlier is back. Spencer tries to call for some help, but he's got to do something about the ghost ship. The tugboat doesn't get out of the way in time, so there's a collision and Spencer and Alex go flying, and we don't see what happens to them. All we get is this image. Their tugboat capsized, and they are nowhere to be seen. Now, did Elsa say that this would be Spencer's last journey because he would die during it? Or did she say it because he wouldn't embark on another journey after arriving in Montana? I'm thinking it's the latter. So I believe that Spencer and Alex are alive, maybe rescued, and this image clearly doesn't tell the whole story. In the meantime, things get ugly in the Red School after they realize that Tiana killed not only Sister Mary, but another sister that sexually assaulted Tiana. Father Renaud goes ballistic on Tiana's cousin and close friend. She insists that she doesn't know where Tiana is headed, and Renaud doesn't believe her. He beats her and eventually kills her. They find Tiana's footprints and go after her. But before they can get to her, she runs into a sheep herder by the name of Hank. He knows Tiana's father, whose name is Ron his horse, and I think we met him when Jacob gifted Banner's sheep to the res because Run's his horse is responsible for the res herd. I'm not sure if Hank is from the same tribe or if these sheep are the sheep from Jacob. But that's beside the point because Hank agrees to help Tiana. He doesn't think it would be a good idea to go to the res, though, because they will look for her there. So this is not going to be a straightforward journey for her. We'll begin our Episode 6 discussion on the Indian Ocean, where Spencer and Alex's tugboat capsized on the way to the Suez Canal. Spencer is able to swim up to the overturned hull and call out Alex's name. She hears it and starts banging the floor, or the ceiling in this case, because the boat is upside down and she's alive because she's in an air pocket. Spencer swims down to retrieve the love of his life, and he is successful. He dives back in to recover some items they might need. While he's down there, Alex can't spot the fine line between boldness and stupidity, so she goes after a lifebuoy and starts drifting away from the boat. Luckily, Spencer comes to her rescue once again, and he reassures her that this won't be the end of their journey because he made contact with another ship before they went down. That ship doesn't show up in the area until it's nighttime, and Spencer has to fire a few rounds from the rifle he recovered to make sure they are spotted. A couple of sailors fetch our protagonist and bring them to their ship, which is headed to Marseille, France. Captain Shipley said they can book passage to the U.S. once they're in Marseille, but he points out how slow the immigration process is nowadays, and so Alex might slow things down. Spencer is quick on his feet. He says that Captain Shipley can officiate their wedding there and then because they're in international waters and captains have that authority. This way, Alex wouldn't have any trouble getting into the U.S. as she would be Spencer's wife. The captain is a bit hesitant at first because a sham marriage would be illegal, but he quickly realizes that these two are madly in love and they were going to get married sooner or later. He gives them a box of rings to choose from. These belong to dead sailors whose addresses weren't known, and Spencer goes, "The ocean almost took us, and now it gives us rings. I think I'll keep mine." End quote. Spencer picks one, but they're too big for Alex's fingers, so Shipley helps her out. He gives her his wife's ring, saying that she would approve. Our lovely couple gets married, and they immediately get down to business in their tomato-like state after spending a whole day under the sun. Their last scene from this episode is on the bow of the ship where Spencer admits that he shouldn't have taken Alex with him because the universe kept warning him. At first, there were the elephants, then the lions, and finally the shipwreck. It's almost like he was being told to put Alex back where she belonged. Quote, "I'm just too freaking selfish to do it. My dream is that the universe is wrong and you're mine to keep." Alex argues that the dream has already come true and there's no putting her back now. She insists she'll go wherever he goes, even if it's the death of her. This series has had a lot of pieces of feminist dialogue, and this is one of the scarier ones because following Spencer around could really lead to Alex's demise. That would be believable, and I think Spencer is right. It's like they're not meant to be together, but their incredibly strong emotional bond allows them to override everything else and just be together. I think one of the most dishonest excuses people have when they want to break up with someone or when they don't want to be with someone is the timing isn't right, or maybe it could have worked out under different circumstances. I've used those excuses myself, and 99% of the time they are bullcrap. Wanting to be with someone is quite often a binary choice. You either do or don't want to. When you do, you are ready to overcome any difficulty and ignore whatever obstacle you come across. That is exactly what Alex and Spencer are doing, which is what makes their bond so honest, pure, and special. Meanwhile, things are calmer in Montana, where Zane is tasked with finding people willing to join the posse that will go after Banner. While Kara and Sheriff McDowell interview candidates for the recently formed law enforcement wing of the Montana Livestock Association. One of the candidates is rude toward Kara, and he is smacked out of the room, literally. Another one, named Clyde, gets the job immediately because he has law enforcement experience in Chicago, and he is charming. He aces the interview. That is why Kara was about to say that she and McDowell would discuss Clyde's prospects, but McDowell stepped in and offered the job right away. Jacob had warned Kara to be wary of the charming ones, which is why going forward, we should keep a close eye on Clyde. All in all, they've hired 3 men so far. They need 20 of them, so there clearly aren't a lot of great applicants. And Kara, knowing that this process is going to take too much time that the Duttons don't have, decides to tell McDowell what really happened when they were attacked. They previously hid the fact that Banner was the one who organized this attack and that Jacob was badly injured. They did this in order to conceal their weak state and to keep the banks and the thieves away. But people are probably starting to think that Jacob must be dead because he hasn't been seen in public for such a long time. That's why Kiera feels like she needs to get the sheriff involved. This leads to a quarrel between Jacob and Kiera. They were already in disagreement about gathering up a posse to go after Banner. Kiera wanted Jacob to stand back and tends that his goal is not vengeance, but survival. He points to the explosions up north near the Stratford Ranch, where Donald Whitfield's men are starting their mining operations. With ranches to the north and south of Yellowstone now in Donald's control, Jacob knows they're next, which is why he feels the need to take matters into his own hands. This is when Sheriff McDowell and his men arrive. McDowell is angry that Jacob didn't report what went on with Banner's ambush, even after Jacob was in the clear. And the sheriff asserts that he won't allow a range war in Montana, so his deputies will take everybody's statements and arrest Banner the next morning. The sheriff leaves and Jacob gives Kiera the cold shoulder, which he can't believe after all she's done. Jacob goes to the barn, gets on his saddle, and rides off on his own. He comes back at night to find Kiera sitting on the porch, and he continues to claim that he's not after vengeance like she claims. He wants to preserve the land and prevent it from becoming just another city. He argues that Banner is simply a means to an end. He's being used in order to weaken the area, which would allow developers like Donald to swoop in and capitalize. Jacob admits that he knows how much Kiera has suffered and sacrificed, and he says that it's Banner's turn to suffer now. As for Tiana, Hank gives her his son's clothes, and she's going to pretend to be a boy named Joe. When Hank's son comes back with the rest of the flock, Hank will send him to Tiana's father to explain the situation. So that is in the books, and they burn everything from the school except the Bibles because Hank fears the Christian God's wrath. So they don't burn them, they bury those. Just when we think it's a relatively chill week for this portion of the story with no abuse, beatings, or deaths. An officer searching Tiana's grandmother's house pushes her as she tries to stop him. She hits her head and dies. This officer convinces his partner, who is outside, to back his version of the story, which is one of self-defense. The penultimate episode of the season features Tiana's father runs his horse. Finding Isaiah's body. It is not clear if Isaiah was his mother or if she was his mother-in-law, but that's beside the point. He figures lawmen must have killed her because of the tracks outside. Thieves usually don't shoot their horses, and lawmen do, which means the government must have been responsible for this. This is when Hank's son, Pete, enters the frame with the news about Tiana's escape, and runs his horse tells Pete to go back using a different route to avoid detection. He will catch up to Pete once he buries his sashi and picks up his stuff. Later that day, priests from Tiana's school run into Pete and forcefully detain him when he refuses to cooperate. They plan to take him to the school, so a priest stays with him while the other two go after the sheep herd's tracks because Pete mentioned that that's what he was doing out there herding sheep. Things get heated between the priest and Pete as the priest keeps scorning the natives, while Pete responds by slighting the priest's beliefs. The priest can't take it anymore, and he's about to kill Pete, but that's when Runs His Horse shows up and scalps the priest. We saw him earlier finding Pete's horse, and he tracked him here to save the day. He kills the priest and eats his soul, which I assume refers to his heart. Before Runs His Horse and Pete can get to Tiana and Hank, the other two priests find Tiana and go after her. Hank is unseen, and he's able to shoot them both. Thinking that both priests are dead, Hank puts his rifle down to carry the injured Tiana, but it turns out one of the priests lives. He picks up Hank's rifle and shoots him. He gets closer to Tiana to shoot her next. He takes a shell from Hank's body to reload, but Tiana smashes his head in with a big rock and survives. Hank, on the other hand, doesn't appear to be as lucky. This was the most consequential and exciting part of the episode, and I was sad to see Hank die. Similar to how I felt when Luca passed away on his tugboat. Neither of them were majorly important characters, but they helped Tiana and Spencer when they were both in dire straits. And luckily, Tiana's father is on his way to her, so hopefully she'll be okay. Though psychologically, I doubt she'll ever get over this much suffering. In the meantime, Banner gets arrested outside his new house given to him by Donald, and the mischievous shipwrecker learns that Jacob has survived the ambush. Jacob, Jack, and their men accompany the sheriff and his deputies as they make the arrest, after which Banner tells Jack that he was lucky to survive 2 different attacks, but he will not be as lucky a third time. Sheriff McDowell figures that's a confession, and that's got to be that, right? Banner will be put away for good by the justice system. No, not so fast. Clyde, who was recently hired as a livestock agent, informs Donald, who is outside one of his minds, that Banner just got arrested. Donald thinks arresting Banner was a mistake. They should have killed him if they wanted to get rid of him because Donald has the means to get him freed. He gets in touch with his lawyer, Chadwick Benton, who visits Banner in jail and tells him to not say anything until his arraignment the next day. Donald is happy to learn that Judge Rowling will preside over the case, and Chadwick will meet Rowlings outside his chambers and make sure that the judge understands how crucial Banner is to Donald's operations. Rowlings will set bail, even though this is a murder case, and Banner will get out, at least temporarily. Banner also asks Chadwick to take care of the 2 prostitutes who were at his house when he got arrested, and Donald wants to handle this matter himself. We soon learn why, as Donald reveals his deviant side. He's a sadistic freak, so he enjoys watching one of the hookers spank the other one with a belt. Meanwhile, back at the Yellowstone, Kara and Elizabeth anxiously await Jack and Jacob's return. Kara keeps writing letters to Spencer as an alternative to writing a journal, and she urges Elizabeth to try writing too, but that's not her style. She'd rather do something like baking a cake to take her mind off of things. So Kara teaches her how to bake a cake, and the men arrive when the ladies are in the middle of their baking session. Later on, as they're enjoying some drinks and cake at the dinner table, Jack is reading the newspaper, and this starts a political conversation between him and his uncle, Jacob. They find out about a new commission being formed in Washington to regulate mining, and this will be headed by the bosses of mining companies like Donald. And Jacob goes, "That should tell you all you need to know about politics, son." End quote. Jack points out that Jacob is no different because he's a cattleman in charge of regulating cattle. He's doing the same thing Donald is doing. This prompts a long monologue by Jacob about a scientific study showing how problems start to arise whenever the population of a tribe exceeds 500 people, and the strongest people take advantage of the weakest if there isn't a government. Government is man's way of trying to control our behavior, but it can't be controlled. It is what we are. Sooner or later, the people who would enrich themselves at your expense will use the government to do it. End quote. Jacob's argument as it relates to his family is this: no matter what you do, people like Donald will use government organizations to dominate others. So why shouldn't we do the same and use those organizations for our benefit? Jack asks him about right and wrong, and Jacob says, there is no such thing. There's only what's good for this ranch and your family. This conversation summarizes the entire Dutton family's mindset perfectly, all the way from James Dutton in 1883 to John Dutton in the 21st century. Every single Dutton we've met prioritizes their own families and ranches' well-being over things like religion or general ideas of ethics or laws or patriotism or anything else you can think of. Those are not factored in. They're only viewed as tools to be used in their single-minded pursuit of protecting their ranch and their family. Last but not least, Spencer and Alex are dropped off in Italy, and they're able to book passage to the U.S., and they will leave in a few days. The now married couple are enjoying some of the local delights as well as each other's company when they run into the guy Alex was supposed to get married to. Things are about to get very awkward in Sicily. The Season 1 final puts Spencer and Alex in an awkward position as they board the same ship to London as Alex's ex-fiance, Arthur. At first, the plan is to stay out of sight to avoid him. However, they have to go up to the deck when Alex gets seasick. And there they run into Jennifer, who's the only bridesmaid who didn't go back to London after Alex blew off the wedding. Jennifer keeps telling Alex how what she did is going to affect her standing. Alex doesn't care. She's going to the U.S. anyway. They will book a cruise to the U.S. as soon as they arrive in London. And Jennifer mentions that Arthur hasn't been doing too well following the embarrassing breakup. And we soon learn what she means when Alex and Spencer dine in the Grand Hall. This upsets Arthur greatly, even though his father tries to calm him down by saying that at least he avoided marrying a woman who obviously doesn't love him. Arthur Sr. convincing his son to dance with Jennifer, and this is the beginning of the end for him. The two couples end up colliding on the dance, sing floor, and Arthur gets even more angry when Spencer turns his back to him. Later on, Arthur challenges Spencer to a duel, and Spencer urges Arthur to let it go because it will not end well for him. Arthur Sr. tries to get his son to compose himself, but to no avail. As Spencer and Alex walk away, Arthur repeatedly calls. Alex avor, prompting Spencer to return, punch Arthur. Arthur and accept a challenge. We briefly meet the captain of the ship, Hurley, as he is notified of the duel, and it is revealed that Arthur is royalty. In fact, Arthur Sr. is the prince in succession when it comes to fighting, though titles don't mean much and the Earl of Sussex is defeated multiple times in an easy fashion. Nonetheless, he refuses to yield and charges at Spencer with a pistol, attempting to shoot him point blank in the head, which forces Spencer to react and throw Arthur overboard. Arthur's body is never recovered. This is when Captain Hurley arrives at the scene and Spencer is taken to the brig, as no one watching the duel wants to go against Arthur Sr.'s word. Alex insists that Arthur had a pistol in his hand, and she actually manages to convince Jennifer to tell the truth. This eventually leads to Spencer's release. He will not be charged, but Arthur Sr. gets Spencer removed from the ship. He has that authority as a prince. They haven't arrived in London yet, and we don't know exactly where Spencer is dropped off. Could be France, Spain, or Portugal. Hard to tell, really. What we do know is they don't let Alex leave with him, and she'll have to find her own way to Montana from London. Both of them shout that they love each other, and Alex says she'll meet him in Bozeman. She knows about that location from Kara's letters. As we watch them get separated, Kara reads her latest letter, quote, Spencer, I fear everything your parents fought so hard to build is being ripped from us. You are its only hope. You are our only hope. You must hurry, Spencer. You must hurry or there will be nothing left to fight for. End quote. This letter won't reach Spencer because Kara tosses it away, suggesting that she is giving up hope of seeing Spencer again. Maybe she realizes they're going to have to fend off for themselves because Spencer either won't arrive in time to save them, or he won't arrive at all. So what is going on in Montana that would get Kara all worked up? Well, firstly, Banner is released without bail until trial, thanks to his lawyer Chadwick, who apparently also represents the governor, which shows just how well-connected Donald is. Chadwick argues that there is no physical evidence in this case and the judge buys it. We heard Donald tell Chadwick to meet the judge outside his chambers, so this is not surprising to us. But it certainly is to the Duttons. Things get heated before Banner leaves. He calls Jacob a coward for trying to end this fight in a courtroom. Jack steps up and some men hold him back. Banner goes, quote, I'm guessing the blonde didn't make it, end quote, referring to Elizabeth. Jack tries to take a swing after that remark, but Banner dodges and hits back. Banner reiterates his point about not ending this in a courtroom, telling Jacob that this will end on a field and that he should stop sending boys to do men's work. Jacob responds, saying that if a field is where he wants to die, he's more than happy to help him out. At Donald's mansion, he and Banner discuss their next steps, and Donald urges the sheep herder not to make any ill-advised moves. He says they can beat Jacob with a pen instead of a sword, and Banner might think he is rich now, but all he has is some money. He doesn't have generational wealth. For that, he needs to acquire the Yellowstone. How could he do that? Well, luckily, Donald is helping him. He has sources everywhere, and one of those sources works at the bank Jacob deals with. Jacob goes there for a loan. He needs some money to buy more hay for his cattle to make sure they survive the winter. But the bank has been hurt by these kinds of loans before. Not by Jacob, by other ranchers. Which is why they've stopped giving out these types of loans altogether. And, to compound the issue, Donald's source informs him that Jacob is having money troubles. That is when Donald takes a look at the state of Jacob's land, what the official documents say, and he finds out that the Yellowstone is owned by the Duttons without any loans, so he can't use that as an attack vector. However, they are behind on their property taxes, and Donald takes the liberty to make the first biannual payment. He reveals this to the Duttons in front of their house. And this is devastating because if an individual pays someone else's late property taxes, and if that individual is not paid back by the owner before the end of the year, the property deed reverts back to the individual who paid the taxes. This is a very shrewd move, and Jacob knows it. He is cornered because the ranch doesn't make enough money to pay Donald back. Some of the cattle was stolen earlier in the season. A part of what remained was sold to raise funds, and his current herd won't survive the winter without more hay. That is why Kara appears so hopeless at the end of the season. She doesn't even bother sending the letter to Spencer, wondering if it's even possible to get out of this predicament. During the aforementioned confrontation, Donald tells Kara that decency doesn't apply to him because he's a businessman, and that's why he's doing this. He's expanding his business empire before Montana turns into a state relying on tourism. Talking of decency, Donald continues to fool around with the 2 prostitutes he hired. He reveals that he doesn't enjoy watching people suffer, and instead, he likes watching people enjoy the power they've hold over someone else. So he keeps playing these twisted games and slowly makes the 2 women hitting each other enjoy it. Meanwhile, Elizabeth has a miscarriage, which makes her feel like a failure, worthless, and without purpose. Jack consoles and comforts her, brilliantly using his aunt Kara as an example to say that not being able to have children isn't the end of the world. Kara doesn't have children, and she certainly isn't without purpose. This storyline could turn out to be quite important for the Dunn legacy. Previously, the most likely scenario was that Jack was the ancestor of the modern Yellowstone family. But this miscarriage might mean that he and Elizabeth won't have any children, so Spencer and Alex could be the ones extending the Dutton lineage. Elsewhere, Clyde continues to wreak havoc as he discovers that the foreman of the Yellowstone, Zane, is married to an Asian woman named Alice. The anti-miscegenation law in Montana was in place until the 1950s. It was illegal for whites to marry blacks or Asians. And Clyde snitches on this couple because he secretly works for Donald. Alice is taken away by the authorities while Zane is beaten as he tries to stop them. Lastly, Marshall Kent, the officer who killed Ezashi, makes his way to the residential school to track Tiana. The 3 priests who went after her haven't returned, and Kent figures they must be dead. He insists that Father Reynaud comes with them because he knows what Tiana looks like, and they get on their way. First they find a priest killed by Runce's horse, and then they find the other 2. By this point, Runce's horse and Pete got to this campsite and rescued Tiana. Kent correctly assumes that they'll be heading down south to Comanche land because it's chaotic down there, so they will take the train to get there before Tiana. We should also mention that Pete and Tiana bond during their journey, despite Ron's horse's warnings. Thank you for watching my 1923 Season 1 recap. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video. Thank you for watching. See you soon.